We're actually going to start tonight with an exclusive, with a bit of a scoop. At the beginning of the Trump administration, there were a lot of somewhat strange personnel choices made by the incoming president. I mean, even in the cabinet, Rick Perry for Energy Secretary, right? Rick Perry had not only proposed abolishing the Energy Department, he also appeared to believe that the Energy Department was the oil and gas part of the government and not the part that deals with, like, nuclear weapons. He didn't even appear to understand that once he had been named the Secretary of Energy. So that was a weird choice. Also, remember, the party planner for Eric Trump's wedding was put in charge of housing in the northeastern United States. That was a weird choice. Also, the president's personal bankruptcy lawyer, his bankruptcy lawyer, was named ambassador to Israel for the United States. Also, the president really did make an effort to try to make his personal pilot the head of the FAA. So there were some weird choices right off the bat. One less high-profile but equally weird choice came when President Trump picked a man named Scott Lloyd to be the director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That was a weird choice, too, because Scott Lloyd had never worked with refugees ever. He had never worked with resettling anyone. So the idea that he'd be in charge of resettling refugees was odd. What Scott Lloyd had done in his life is that he'd been a conservative activist lawyer from a Catholic group called the Knights of Columbus. He basically was an activist anti-abortion guy. His body of public writings included stuff like this, quote, "Facts about abortion, why you can't be pro-life and pro-contraception." This was all about how birth control is the same thing as abortion, and women shouldn't be allowed access to either in this country. All abortion should be illegal for American women, and birth control should be illegal for American women, too. So that was his public profile before he got put in charge of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And if you want to know what happens when you put somebody with that pedigree and that experience in charge of, randomly, refugee resettlement in this country, well, now we've done that as a country, so now we know how that works out. Here's a headline from the LA Times, December 2017. Trump official sought to block abortion for 17-year-old rape victim. Scott Lloyd is the Trump official in question. Part of this scandal was him writing a memo outlining his reasoning for blocking a teenage rape victim from accessing abortion. Quote, "I'm convinced that assisting with an abortion in this case is not in her best interest. I am mindful that abortion is offered by some as a solution to a rape. I disagree." From getting an abortion, using his status as a federal official in charge of this refugee resettlement agency in order to do it. The 17-year-old in that case, the 17-year-old girl who'd been raped, she was one of many kids who arrived in the U.S. applying for refugee status. She was sent alone to a shelter operated by the Trump administration. At some point along the way, she found out that she was pregnant as a result of that rape. In America, it does not matter whether you are an immigrant or not. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter where you're from. In America, you have a constitutionally protected right to get an abortion if you want one. The government is not allowed to stop you from getting one if you want one. That is a decision that you are allowed to make for yourself. It is protected by the Constitution. But when Scott Lloyd took over the Office of Refugee Resettlement, he became the guy who was in charge of all of those kids. And he decided he would make it his first priority in that job to block any girl who came into the clutches of that agency he was running. He would block any girl under his purview at that agency from getting an abortion. The only reason that 17-year-old rape victim from that 2017 case, the only reason she eventually was allowed to get an abortion, and the only reason we know about her plight, is because she found her way to lawyers at the ACLU who took her case, who sued the government on her behalf and won. She was the first Jane Doe in the case. She decided she wanted an abortion. And it's interesting, in her case, she had raised the funds needed to pay for it herself. She had gotten a judge in Texas to explicitly grant her permission to get the abortion, despite the fact that she had no way of getting parental consent for it. She had arranged for travel at her own expense to and from her doctor's appointments that would be necessary for her to get the abortion. But still, Scott Lloyd's agency, the federal government agency he was running, wouldn't let her leave the shelter to go to the doctor. That is what ultimately became a class action lawsuit led by that pregnant teenage girl who was literally being forced to continue this pregnancy against her will by the U.S. government until the ACLU intervened to take her case and won it. Bridget Amiri is the ACLU attorney who sued on her behalf, and we talked to her about it at the time.
They were literally holding her hostage, blocking the door, preventing her from obtaining an abortion. And I do believe that that was their goal, to hold her hostage until she carried this pregnancy to term against her will.
Bridget Amiri talking about her client, who had the name in court of Jane Doe. As that case made its way through the courts, the ACLU kept turning up more Janes, more girls who were being held in shelters overseen by this guy, Scott Lloyd, who were being blocked from getting an abortion. And it soon became very clear why. This was not just some fluke thing where somebody wasn't properly trained or something. This was an official policy of that agency under this Trump administration official, Scott Lloyd. Bridget Amiri, the ACLU attorney, she got to depose Scott Lloyd as part of that ACLU lawsuit. Here's part of how that went.
You're personally opposed to abortion, correct?
Yes.
You've written on the subject?
Yes.
You're personally opposed to contraception, correct?
Depends.
You wrote an article that said in order to be pro-life, you needed to be anti-contraception.
That was the title of the article. Something along those lines.
Yeah, something along those lines. Something like the title of the article, Why You Can't Be Pro-Life and Pro-Contraception. Something along those lines. So those are his views. Bridget Amiri from the ACLU goes on to ask him about how it is when he's running this agency that essentially controls the fate and controls the physical movement of all of these girls who are in this country because they're asking for asylum, how it is that all of these girls in that agency that he's running keep getting blocked from accessing abortions. And watch what she gets him to admit.
Have you ever approved an abortion request in your time as OR director?
No.
Are there any circumstances under which you would approve an abortion request?
Objection calls for speculation.
Yeah. Well, it's going to not answer that.
No, you can still answer it even though.
I don't know.
Let me back up. You've denied abortion requests, correct?
Yes.
You've denied abortion requests even in the context where the pregnancy is a result of rape, right?
Yes.
So the way the system was working under the Trump administration is that Scott Lloyd was in charge of this agency when a teenage girl who was a rape victim made her way to the United States seeking help in this country. She has to get permission from Scott Lloyd personally to get an abortion because he's weighing in on all of these cases, blocking these girls from getting it. And so Scott Lloyd has appointed himself the gatekeeper about whether or not these girls are allowed to access the thing they're supposed to have a constitutional right to get. He's appointed himself the gatekeeper, and it turns out he's never granted that permission anytime anybody's come to that gate. And he doesn't know under what circumstances he ever would grant that permission. So this was starting to look like a de facto U.S. government Trump administration policy. That deposition with Scott Lloyd was released in February of last year as the lawsuit was still ongoing. Then in April, the New York Times reported something that began to shed a little bit of light on how that policy was carried out. The New York Times reported that Scott Lloyd, quote, has instructed his staff to give him a spreadsheet each week that tells him about any unaccompanied minors who have asked for an abortion and how far along they are in their pregnancy. In at least one case, he directed staff to read to one girl a description of what happens during an abortion. And when there's a need for counseling, Mr. Lloyd's office calls on someone from its list of preferred life-affirming pregnancy resource centers. So he was keeping a spreadsheet with details that amount to a record of pregnant teens' menstrual cycles. And he was using that information individualized to these individual girls, teenagers, and some of them younger, to block them from accessing abortions that they wanted to get. After the New York Times reported that that spreadsheet existed somewhere inside the federal government, a progressive super PAC called American Bridge filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking the government to hand over that spreadsheet, since that's apparently federal government property, and federal government employees are doing that, tracking these individual girls' menstrual cycles and how far along they are in their pregnancies as federal employees, as as people who are working at a federal agency for the purpose of controlling what happens to those girls' pregnancies. Well, this week, much to the surprise of the people at American Bridge, as far as we can tell, the Trump administration did hand that spreadsheet over, and tonight we have obtained it. And it is a remarkable thing to look at. Here it is. It is 28 pages long. Let me just show you what we're looking at here as best as we can tell. When the government released this document because of the Freedom of Information Act request, they sent it as a PDF document. So they didn't send it as a spreadsheet that you could look at as a spreadsheet. That just means that the titles of the columns are collapsed in some cases. But we think we know what each of these things means. The first column, we believe, is the date when the pregnancy was reported. Second column, we think, is how the pregnancy was reported, how government officials found out about it. The next column contains an alien identification number, which is a unique identifying number for each of these kids who's come over to ask for asylum. The government has redacted those here because that would identify these specific girls in this document. But Scott Lloyd had access to that unique identifying information for each girl. Next is each girl's age. On this document, the girls' ages range from 12 to 17. Next is the name of the shelter where each girl is being held. Then we think this next column is the date each girl was admitted to the shelter. We've partially redacted this column ourselves because it seems like this kind of information could conceivably be used in some bank shot if somebody was trying to identify some of these women at some of these shelters, so we've redacted some of that ourselves. And then you have, in this U.S. government document, the results of their pregnancy tests. You see, they all say positive, positive, positive. Then you have the U.S. government's calculation of the estimated gestation age, how far along these pregnancies are, tracking them for each of these girls. Then the next line is whether the pregnancy is believed to be the result of consensual sex or not. U.S. government keeping track of that for each of these girls on this federal government employee-provided spreadsheet. Then whether or not it was reported as a sexual assault, all those column lines, you see that it's either reported, not reported, reported, not reported. And then the second to last column is TOP requested. TOP in this context we think means termination of pregnancy. So the question of whether or not this girl has asked for an abortion. They're keeping track of that with each of these girls, including their age, how far along they are in their pregnancy, the gestational age of the fetus as believed by the federal government, the circumstances under which the girl may have become impregnated, whether or not it was reported as a sexual assault, and then is she asking for an abortion? The federal government is tracking all this for each of these individual girls down to age 12. And then finally, the last column is reserved for notes on each case. You can zoom in on that notes section. You can see in one case they're talking specifically about the timeline of the girl's last menstrual cycle as being tracked by the Trump administration, except they spell menstrual wrong. But this literally is the government tracking a 15-year-old girl's period because of what the federal government plans to do about it. Let's look at just one entry in detail here so you can just see this is just sort of one at random, just so you can see the kind of data they were collecting. This is a case from March of last year, March of 2018. It's a 14-year-old girl being held in a shelter in Illinois. She's believed to be about 1 month pregnant from non-consensual sex. As you can, 14-year-old girl. As you can see in the notes column, it says assaulted by unknown assailant in COO, which we believe means country of origin here. So this is the federal government, with your tax dollars, keeping an individualized record of pregnant teenage girls' menstrual cycles, whether they've had a positive pregnancy test, what the government knows about how they believe the girls got pregnant, how they believe this individual girl got pregnant, and whether this girl has requested an abortion. And then the last column is, of course, what the federal government is doing about it. And this record was being kept for the express purpose of subverting any of these girls' ability to get an abortion. This was essentially a spreadsheet designed to facilitate federal government action to block these girls from getting any abortion they might want. For any reason, can't imagine why any of them might want that, given the circumstances described in these cold, hard spreadsheet cells. When you look through this 28-page document, I mean, it's full of teenagers, in some cases girls who aren't yet teenagers, who report being raped and being pregnant as a result. And here's Scott Lloyd, Trump administration appointee, compiling this information about these girls and using it so he can intervene as a government official to block each of these girls individually from being able to get the abortion they have asked for. All the while he was tracking in an ongoing way how far along in her pregnancy each girl was, how long he could delay it until it would be illegal, right? How much longer he had to keep blocking her from leaving the shelter that he controlled until she'd be legally forced to give birth, thanks to the U.S. federal government. So this document has never been seen before. This is not the sort of thing we're used to seeing. This is not the sort of thing we expect our government to be keeping tabs on in the modern era. But there's one other element of this that I think is, for me, the part of this that made me want to sort of close the door and yell at this story a little bit. This is the part to me that is actually the most shocking part of it, because remember, the ACLU had sued to stop Scott Lloyd from blocking these girls' access to abortion, right? They did very well in that suit. On March 30th of last year, they won a major victory in that case. Not only had the original Jane Doe been allowed finally to get the abortion that she had been seeking, on March 30th, a federal judge granted class action status to that case and ordered Scott Lloyd and anybody else in charge at the Trump administration's Office of Refugee Resettlement that they needed to, by court order, stop interfering with or obstructing any class member's access to a judicial bypass, to a medical appointment related to pregnancy dating, non-biased counseling, abortion counseling, an actual abortion, or any other pregnancy-related care. So as of March 30th last year, the courts have stepped in and stopped this. The court, March 30th, tells Scott Lloyd, this Trump administration appointee, that as a federal official, he needs to stop interfering with these girls' decisions about whether or not they're going to get an abortion. March 30th was that order from the court. So we called up Bridget Amiri today when we obtained access to this document, this ACLU lawyer who'd fought this case. And one of the things she told us is that among the things that was most shocking about this document, which she had never previously seen, was that the dates on this spreadsheet show that Scott Lloyd kept tracking all the girls' pregnancies and their menstrual cycles for months after that court ruling. That court ruling ordering him to stop interfering with access to abortion. I mean, all of these dates on the first page are from June of last year. He was supposed to stop this stuff in March. He just kept doing it. And we don't know if Scott Lloyd continued to physically block girls from access to abortion services the way he was before the court ruling, after he was ordered not to by a federal judge. But we do know, thanks to this document uncovered this week, which we are making public for the first time, we do know that he kept on tracking them, regardless of what the court told him. Why would he want to keep a detailed record of individual girls' menstrual cycles and the pregnancy status of individual girls and the means by which they became pregnant and their desires as to whether or not they had expressed that they wanted to have an abortion? Why would he want to keep all of that detailed information up to date, week by week, for all of these girls, if he had pledged that he wasn't going to do anything else to block them from getting what they wanted? I mean, we don't know. We put on a request to HHS to speak with Mr. Lloyd or to get a response from the department tonight. HHS spokesperson told us, quote, "We can't comment because of ongoing litigation on the matter." But the fact that this spreadsheet is being produced on your dime, this is what the federal government does now with individual girls in this circumstance, well, that's where we are. Joining us now is Bridget Amiri. She's Deputy Director of the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Project. She's the lawyer who has been fighting this case in court. Bridget, thank you for being here. I appreciate you helping us validate this document today and understand what we were looking at.
Thanks for having me.
I'm right that you had not seen this document before we obtained it today.
I had not.
There had been reporting that the Trump administration was tracking girls at this level of detail in this one agency. Seeing the document, to me, first of all, has a visceral effect. But it's also, it struck me, when I had read that earlier reporting, I had no idea it was going to be this detailed. Did you know that this was the level of information the government was tracking?
I had a sense it was. I asked Scott Lloyd at his deposition in February about what kind of reports he was getting, because at that point we knew through emails that we had obtained that he was getting weekly reports. So I had a sense that it was at least this level of detail. But you're right, seeing all of it together and all of these young women and their specific requests for abortion was really quite surprising.
as you told us today when we called you to get your take on this and before we asked you to come on the air tonight, you said that it seems shocking, or it's at least surprising, that this level of tracking information about all of these individual girls continued even after the court order in your case, which blocked Lloyd from intervening, blocked the Trump administration from intervening to stop these girls from getting abortions. Is there any reason that you know of or that HHS might have put forward in your litigation that would explain why they'd need to track all of this information about these girls up to and including the date of their last menstrual period if they weren't going to use it to try to continue blocking them from getting abortions?
There's no legitimate government reason to track this information at all. We don't know that there has been any attempt to block any of these young women, but it's curious and I would say creepy that Scott Lloyd was continuing to get this level of information about these young women and their pregnancies even after we got the court order. And I think you're right. For what purpose? We are not aware of any obstruction of attempts, but it is concerning and kind of bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, seeing the other thing to me that I think was visceral, like you first look at it and it takes a while to figure out what you're looking at, and then you realize the level of personal information that they're getting here, and then you realize you're looking at 28 pages of it.
Right.
I mean, part of it is also the volume, that there was this many girls that they were tracking at this level of detail. Did you know that it was this many girls who they sort of had their eyes on in this way?
I didn't know it was this many girls that they had this level of information on. We knew that there were hundreds of young women who were pregnant in custody, and a number of them, some subset of them, were seeking access to abortion. But I did not know that there was this level of detail for this many young women.
Bridget, as I mentioned, the HHS spokesperson late tonight contacted us or returned our call when we had asked for comment and just said they can't comment because of ongoing litigation. What is the status of the litigation here?
So our injunction is still in place, and the government appealed it. We're waiting for a decision from the Court of Appeals. But in the meantime, the government is prohibited from obstructing or interfering with access to abortion for all unaccompanied pregnant minors in their custody. And if anyone has any issues, any concerns, any witness to any problems, they should give the ACLU a call.
Do you anticipate on privacy grounds or on any other grounds? I don't think you can sue for creepiness, but I mean, maybe Margaret Atwood can sue for copyright infringement. But do you anticipate that there might be additional legal action either by the ACLU or by some other party withstanding simply on the basis of the fact that the federal government has been tracking this level of personal information on uniquely identified girls to such an extent and for so long? Might this be a cause for additional action on its own?
It's a good question. I just saw the document a little bit ago, and certainly I'll be talking to my team, and we'll discuss it further.
All right. Bridget Amiri, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Project. Again, thank you for helping us today, even before you knew you could come on tonight, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah, as I mentioned, that is an exclusive here. You won't have heard that story anywhere else. That document was not obtained by my staff. It was obtained by this Super PAC American Bridge. We are being transparent about that sourcing. They provided it to us so that we could make it public. But again, we expect, because it was handed over by HHS as the result of a FOIA request, that this is now fair game for further reporting by any news organization. All right, much more to get to tonight. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.